At 6:48 on a Tuesday morning in November, Cole Whitaker decided that the most honest thing about Canadian winters was that they did not pretend to care about you. The wind off Lake Ontario had a particular personality that morning. Not violent, just indifferent, the kind that walked straight through a wool coat as if fabric were a suggestion. Cole stood outside a Tim Hortons on King Street West, with his phone in one hand and a problem in the other. The problem was that Meridian Capital had just completed its acquisition of Hartfield Group 3 weeks ago, and the complaints folder on his secure server had grown faster than the integration timeline. 41 submissions in 22 days, bullying, wage theft, performance reviews that disappeared when employees filed grievances, managers who moved targets the same week they were supposed to be met. He had asked his operations director, Sasha Leung, to compile them. Sasha had sent the file at midnight with a single line. "You should read all of it before you walk in there." He had not slept well after that. Cole was not the kind of man who announced himself. He had learned early that announced men heard polished things. He had walked into Hartfield's Toronto office twice already as a prospective client, once as a reference check from a vendor, and once, his least dignified attempt, as a courier who had apparently taken a wrong elevator. None of those visits had produced what 41 complaints produced, the unmistakable texture of a workplace that had learned, over years, to absorb cruelty as policy. He needed one more look. Up close, unscheduled. Which was why Cole Whitaker, CEO of Meridian Capital, was standing outside a Tim Hortons at 6:48 in the morning with a dead phone battery, no Canadian cash, and the specific inconvenience of a man who had flown in from Vancouver and forgotten that Toronto did not believe in roaming data plans the way Vancouver did. He pushed open the door. The cafe smelled like coffee and wet boots and the collective resignation of people who had somewhere to be and weren't sure it was worth it. Cole joined the line, which moved the way Toronto lines moved, efficiently, without conversation, with a shared agreement that eye contact was optional. He looked at the menu. He had not been inside a Tim Hortons in 4 years. The last time had been in Thunder Bay during a highway stopover, and someone else had ordered. He studied the menu board now with the focus he usually reserved for acquisition briefs. There were more sizes than he remembered. The sizes had names. The names did not correspond to anything intuitive. When he reached the counter, the young man behind it waited with the patience of someone who had learned that early morning customers were either very decisive or completely lost. "I'll have a coffee," Cole said. "What size?" Cole looked at the board again. "Medium. Is that the actual medium or the marketing medium?" The cashier blinked. Cole said, "sometimes medium is the largest practical size and small's merely a statement of intent." Someone in line behind him made a small sound of disbelief. A voice said, from directly behind him, "It's a medium. It fits in your hand and it's bigger than the small." Cole turned. The woman was roughly 35, wearing a gray parka that had a small coffee stain near the pocket and the expression of someone who had been awake since before it was reasonable. Her hair was pulled back without ceremony. There were shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup. She was holding a transit card between 2 fingers and looking at him with the specific patience of someone who had somewhere to be and was choosing not to make it his problem. "A medium, then," Cole said to the cashier. "And a double-double," the woman added, nodding at the cashier. "Together's fine." Cole turned again. "You don't have to." "I know." She handed over the transit card. "That's what makes it different from an accident." The cashier ran it through. The woman tucked the card back in her pocket with the brisk efficiency of someone who had made a decision and was already done thinking about it. They stepped to the side to wait for the cups. "Thank you," Cole said. "It was $4.30. She glanced at him sideways. "You looked like you were about to negotiate with the size chart, and I have a bus in 6 minutes." "I wasn't negotiating. I was clarifying. Those aren't different things at 7 in the morning." His cup arrived first. He held it with both hands because the walk from the hotel had convinced him that his fingers had reconsidered their relationship with sensation. She took her double-double without looking at him, then looked at the time on her phone and made a quiet sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word. "You're going to miss it," Cole said. "There's another one in 9 minutes." She didn't sound bothered. She sounded like a woman who had already recalculated. "It'll make me 4 minutes late, which means Renata gets to say something about it in that tone she has. Which means I get to spend 4 minutes not reacting to the tone. Renata. My manager." The woman wrapped both hands around her cup. She has a gift for making punctuality feel like a moral failing rather than a practical one. Cole studied the side of her face. She wasn't performing the complaint for sympathy. She was simply stating facts the way people stated weather. "What do you do?" he asked. She glanced at him, reassessing whether the question was worth answering from a stranger who didn't know the difference between a small and a medium. Apparently she decided it was. "Project coordinator. Hartfield Group." She nodded vaguely in the direction of the glass towers across King Street. 12 floors of people who believe that a well-formatted deck is the same thing as an idea. Cole was quiet for one careful second. "Do you like it?" "I like having benefits." She said it without hesitation, the way people said things that were true enough to have stopped being uncomfortable. "My sister's in her last year at U of T. I pay half her tuition. The benefits are the only reason the math makes sense." She didn't say it like a confession. She said it like arithmetic. Cole looked out the window at the gray morning, at the towers across the street, where Hartfield Group occupied floors 9 through 12. "I'm observing something," he said, "that I think may need some attention." The woman looked at him for a moment. "That's either very vague or very specific." "Bit of both. Are you a consultant?" "Something like that." She seemed to accept this with the same efficiency she'd applied to the menu. "Well, good luck with whatever you're observing." She picked up her cup. "I've got a 9-minute bus to catch." She walked out. Cole watched through the glass doors as she joined the street, head down against the wind, and disappeared into the movement of King Street at 7:02 in the morning. He looked down at the coffee she'd paid for, then across at the Hartfield building. He already knew what he was going to find when he walked in there. The complaints folder had told him most of it, but there was something different about hearing it standing in a Tim Hortons from a woman who paid for a stranger's coffee rather than lose 90 seconds, and who said the words "I like having benefits" the way other people said "I like breathing." Cole finished his coffee slowly, standing at the window, watching the city move. Then he walked across the street. Nadia Osei-Addo had worked at Hartfield Group for 4 years, which meant she had worked for Renata Sorensen for 3 of them, and she had spent approximately 1 year of that total learning to disappear. Not literally. But workplace invisibility was a skill she had discovered, and Renata had inadvertently taught it to her, the way difficult weather teaches people to dress in layers. She arrived 4 minutes late. Renata was standing near the printer bank when Nadia walked in, which was either a coincidence or wasn't. "Good morning," Nadia said. 4 minutes, Renata said. "Transit delay. Everyone takes transit, Nadia." Nadia smiled the smile she kept for moments like this, pleasant, empty, filed under "not today." She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the resource allocation report she had spent 11 hours building over the weekend. It was due at the 10 o'clock cross-team review. Her name was on the file. She had checked twice. By 9:45, Renata had redistributed the deck with her own name in the title slide. This was not new. Nadia had a folder on her personal drive called Documentation, which she maintained the way her mother maintained a recipe box, carefully, without knowing exactly when it would be needed, but certain that the day would come. She sat in the 10 o'clock review and watched Renata present her work. She took notes. She answered the 2 questions the VP directed at her as if she had been invited to the conversation as a courtesy. The VP, a man named Douglas Park, nodded at her answers and then looked at Renata, because Renata was the one whose name was on the slides. After the meeting, Nadia's colleague Marcus, not the same Marcus she'd known before, a different one, newer, still young enough to look surprised when things were unfair, leaned over and said quietly, "That was yours." "I know," Nadia said. "Are you going to?" "I'm going to eat my lunch," she said. "And then I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do." She did not say, "I've been figuring that out for 8 months." She did not say, "HR has my grievance. It's been sitting there for 11 weeks. She did not say any of the things that were true and tired and living just below the surface of the professional smile. She ate her lunch at her desk. She looked at the documentation folder. She thought about her sister's tuition. She thought about the benefits package. She thought about the woman in the Tim Hortons this morning, who had said "I like having benefits" in that tone, and realized with mild horror that she had become that woman, or that woman was a version of her that had simply started her morning with better coffee. The thought made her laugh briefly into her sandwich. It was the only honest thing that happened to her all day, so she held on to it. The all-staff meeting scheduled for the following Thursday at 10. It had been announced internally as a post-acquisition alignment session with leadership from the new parent company. Renata had forwarded the calendar invite with a note about professional presentation standards, which Nadia had read 3 times trying to determine whether it was directed at her specifically or at everyone generally. The answer was both. Nadia arrived 7 minutes early, which was precisely early enough to avoid being late, and precisely late enough to avoid the extended small talk near the coffee station that Renata used to conduct informal performance assessments. She sat in the 3rd row from the back. The room filled. Douglas Park took a seat at the front. Renata positioned herself near the presentation screen with the body language of someone expecting to be asked a question about something important. Other managers clustered. Staff lined the sides and back. Someone had brought donuts, which Nadia thought was either a very optimistic or very pessimistic gesture depending on how the meeting went. A woman Nadia didn't recognize came in first and introduced herself as Sasha Leung, operations director at Meridian Capital. She had a clipboard and the expression of someone who was here to observe, not to perform. Then Cole Whitaker walked in. Nadia's brain refused the information for approximately 1.5 seconds. He was wearing a dark suit that fit the way expensive suits fit, like someone had measured the actual person, which was apparently not as common as it should be. His hair was dry. His expression was entirely different from the man who had asked whether medium was the actual medium or the marketing medium. He looked at the room with the calm, direct attention of someone who had been reading about this room for weeks and was now seeing whether the room matched the file. He looked at her. Not long. Not in any way that anyone else would notice, but she felt it, the fractional recognition, the small adjustment in his expression that said, "I know exactly who you are," and then moved on because this was not the moment. Nadia looked at the donut in front of her and thought, with great precision, "I bought a stranger coffee, and he turned out to own the building." She did not reach for the donut. Cole Whitaker did not open with synergy. He did not open with a slide about shared values or a video of smiling people at desks that did not look like these desks. He thanked the room for its time, and then said that he had spent the past 3 weeks at Hartfield Group in a number of capacities, as a prospective client, as a vendor reference, as a very unconvincing courier, and that the picture he had assembled did not match the one in the acquisition report. A nervous sound moved through the room, not quite laughter, something more like recognition. He turned to the screen. The first slide showed complaint submission rates by department over 18 months. The numbers were high, the resolution rates were low. The correlation between complaint submissions and negative performance reviews filed in the following 60 days was precise enough to be a policy rather than a coincidence. Renata's expression from where Nadia was sitting went through several stages. The first was confusion. The second was recalibration. The third was the particular stillness of someone who had just understood that the weather had changed. The next slide showed documentation, project records, file metadata, submission timestamps, name removals. Nadia recognized her own work in the 3rd row of examples without needing her name to be attached to it. 8 months of work, documented and removed and presented under someone else's name. She felt the heat of it behind her eyes. Not tears, exactly, but something adjacent. The particular feeling of being seen by evidence rather than by anyone who had chosen to look. Douglas Park was very still. Renata spoke first. She said the data was being taken out of context. She said high-pressure environments sometimes required strong management styles. She said that some employees had difficulty adapting to pace and accountability, and that Meridian Capital was perhaps not fulfilling for the operational complexity of Hartfield's client portfolio. Then she said, in a tone that was careful enough to be almost invisible, that Mr. Whitaker's perspective might be influenced by limited time in the environment. Cole looked at her for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was level. "What you're describing as strong management," he said, "appears in 41 documented submissions as something else. I've read all of them. I didn't come to this meeting with a conclusion. I came with a question. The answers are in the documentation." He paused. "Renata Sorensen's employment with Hartfield Group is terminated, effective today." The sentence landed the way those sentences always landed, not with drama, but with the particular weight of a door closing. No shouting, no gavel, just a fact stated plainly, in a room full of people who had been living with the opposite fact for a very long time. Someone exhaled loudly enough to be heard. Nadia looked at the table. She did not feel victorious. She felt the strange vertigo of a problem you have adapted so thoroughly to solving that its absence briefly disorients you. After the meeting, she did not know how to stand in the hallway. People looked at her and looked away. Marcus stopped beside her and said something that began with "I should have," and she spared him by saying she had to make a call, which was true. And she went to the stairwell, because it was the one place in the building that had no seating, and therefore no one who could try to comfort her awkwardly. Cole found her there 20 minutes later. She was sitting on the stairs between floors 11 and 12, eating a protein bar she had found in her jacket pocket, which felt like an appropriate response to the morning. He stood a floor below her, which put them roughly at eye level, which she thought was either coincidental or not. "So," he said, "do I call you Mr. Whitaker, or the man who didn't know Tim Hortons had sizes?" "Cole is fine, Cole." She took another bite of the protein bar. "You were undercover. I prefer observing without announcement." "Sure. For 3 weeks, 17 days. That's still a lot of days to be pretending to be a courier." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "The courier attempt was not my best work. I heard about that. The elevator thing. I went up to 14 by mistake. 14 is an accounting firm. They were very polite about it." Despite herself, Nadia almost smiled. She recovered quickly. "I need you to understand something," she said. "That coffee was not an audition. I wasn't trying to get anything from you. I didn't know who you were, and I still wouldn't have stood there watching you fight with the size chart while I missed my bus. I know that. Do you?" She looked at him steadily. "Because right now my name is going to be attached to this story in ways I didn't choose. And there's a version of this where I become the woman who bought the CEO coffee and got her manager fired, which makes it sound like I planned something, which I didn't, and which flattens 4 years of documented work into a feel-good anecdote about a Tuesday." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly what I'm trying to make sure doesn't happen. Trying on it." Nadia looked at the wall. The stairwell smelled like concrete and cleaning solution, and the particular neutrality of a space that was meant to be passed through, not occupied. "My sister has 1 semester left," she said, not really to him. "I've been in that documentation folder for 8 months. I filed the HR grievance in March. It's November." Cole said nothing for a moment. "I know," he said. 11 weeks. It's in the file." She turned to look at him. He met her eyes without flinching. "Then you know I wasn't waiting for you to fix it," she said. "I was waiting for the process to work. Those are different things." "They are," he said, "and the process failed. That's mine to address." She finished the protein bar, folded the wrapper into a small square, put it in her pocket. "The project credit," she said. "The official record, those files need to be corrected, not as a favor, as an accurate record, already in progress policy. The response timelines. Sasha is working on a full review, with input from staff. Not just management." "Yes." She stood up, which put her a step higher than him, which she did not mind. "I'm not your proof of anything," she said. "I'm not evidence that Hartfield is fixable or that Meridian is decent. I'm a project coordinator with 8 months of documentation and a sister who has 1 semester left." "I know," Cole said. "I'm not asking you to be proof of anything." She studied him for a moment. He had the look of a man who had spent the last 3 weeks reading about a problem and was now, finally, standing inside it. There was something in his expression that was not executive resolve or leadership performance. It was something quieter, the look of someone who had understood something new and was not trying to move past it quickly. She walked past him down the stairs. He did not follow. The story became public on a Friday afternoon, the way uncomfortable things often did, quietly enough that you didn't notice until it was already everywhere. A staff member at an adjacent company had been in the Tim Hortons that Tuesday morning. They had recognized Cole from a conference photograph. They had posted about it vaguely on a local business forum. A journalist at a Toronto outlet had found it by Saturday morning. By Monday, 3 national publications had a version of the story, and by Tuesday the headline had been written in 4 different ways, all of them arriving at the same basic structure. Coffee, stranger, CEO, manager fired. Nadia read the first article in the break room and felt the specific nausea of being made into a parable. The headline in one paper read, "She bought a stranger a coffee. He fired her boss the next week." There was no photograph of her. Someone had enough sense for that. But her department was identified, and her role was described as a long-suffering employee, which she objected to on principle, because she had not been long-suffering. She had been strategically patient. which was a different thing requiring more skill and considerably less sympathy. Her sister called that evening. "You're on the internet. I'm aware. It's kind of a beautiful story. It's kind of a reductive story," Nadia said, pouring herself a glass of water. The coffee was incidental. 8 months of documentation was not. "I know, but, bae." She used her sister's name with the specific weight that older siblings learn to deploy. The coffee was $4.30. The documentation was 8 months of my life. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "Can I share the article?" "No, it makes you sound really cool. Share the documentation." "Don't share the article." Beatrice laughed, which was the right response, and Nadia felt slightly better. At work the next morning, Meridian's communications team had placed a draft campaign proposal on the shared drive. It was titled Roots of Change, the human moments that build better companies. The first section featured the coffee story with a warm brown color palette and suggested photography of a Tim Hortons cup with steam rising. Nadia stared at it for 40 seconds. Then she forwarded it to Cole with a single line. "If this gets approved, I am submitting a formal invoice for the original $4.30, adjusted for emotional inflation." His response came 11 minutes later. "Killing it now. Thank you for the warning." The campaign was killed by 2 p.m. 2 days later, she was called into a meeting with Sasha Leung and Douglas Park, who had survived the management review and appeared to be operating with the specific humility of a man who had recently understood how close he had come to not surviving it. The meeting was about the formal staff feedback process that Meridian was implementing. Sasha wanted a staff representative with direct experience of Hartfield's complaint system to participate in redesigning the escalation protocols. "Paid consulting basis," Sasha said, "separate from your coordinator role." Nadia looked at the agenda in front of her. It was detailed, specific. It had timelines and accountability markers and a section on caregiver accommodation policies that was written by someone who had clearly read the complaint files. "Who wrote this?" she asked. "Cole started it," Sasha said without expression. "I finished it." Nadia looked at the caregiver section again. It had her sister's specific situation named as a case type. Not her name, but the circumstance: employees providing financial support to dependents enrolled in post-secondary education. She had mentioned it exactly once, in a Tim Hortons, to a stranger who had been asking an irrelevant question about cup sizes. She had not expected it to appear as a policy category 11 days later. "I'll need full access to the complaint archive," she said. "You have it, and I want the staff feedback sessions to be voluntary and anonymous. Not mandatory and recorded." "Agreed, and when the protocols are published, my name goes on the final report. Not as staff contributor, as co-author." Sasha wrote it down without discussion. Nadia looked at the agenda one more time. "Okay," she said. The staff feedback session happened on a Thursday afternoon. Sasha had structured it carefully. Voluntary attendance, no managers in the room except Douglas Park, who sat at the back and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he had done in 3 weeks. People spoke. A designer talked about a year of uncredited work. A project manager described hiding a cancer diagnosis from HR because the last employee who had taken medical leave had been moved to a non-client-facing role within 6 months. A woman in accounts described submitting the same workplace accommodation request 4 times over 2 years and receiving a different reason for denial each time. Nadia listened and took notes, because that was her job in that room. Near the end of the session, she spoke. Not because she planned to, but because the room had become honest in the particular way that rooms do when people decide to stop performing composure, and she thought honesty deserved more honesty. She said she had been in that room for 4 years. She said she had documented everything, because she had understood early that the process would require documentation, which meant she had spent 4 years being professional, in a way that added to her workload without reducing the problem. She said that had been her calculation to make, and she had made it. She did not want anyone in that room to think the coffee had changed the outcome. The coffee was a Tuesday morning coincidence. The documentation was the thing. The documentation was the reason there was something to find when someone decided to look, she said. The process needed to work without a CEO having to go undercover and order a wrong-sized coffee. She said, if the only path to accountability requires a coincidence, it is not accountability. It is luck, and luck was not a benefits package. The room was quiet after she finished. Cole, who had been seated near the side wall and had said nothing for 40 minutes, did not say anything now either. He looked at her. Then he looked at Douglas Park. Then he looked at Sasha and nodded once. He did not make a speech. He did not translate her words into a leadership moment. He just let them be what they were. After, he found her in the small kitchen on the 11th floor where she was washing her coffee mug with the focused attention of a woman giving her hands something to do. "You didn't have to speak," he said. "I know." She kept washing the mug. "That's why I did." He stood in the doorway, which was a respectful distance and also the only space available in a kitchen designed for 2 people maximum. "I want to ask you something," he said. "That is not about work." She turned off the tap, dried the mug, set it on the rack. "The answer to an unasked question," she said, "is not automatically yes." "I know." He looked at her with the directness that she had noticed on the first morning, in the Tim Hortons, which had seemed at the time like the directness of a man who was lost. She understood now that it was the directness of a man who was paying attention. "Would you like to have dinner? Not as a thank you. Not as a debrief. Just dinner." That's 4 words of explanation for something that could have been 2. "I'm practicing concision. When did you start?" "Recently. I'm told I have room to grow." Nadia looked at him for a moment. He did not try to fill the space. That was, she thought, the first genuinely promising thing she had observed about Cole Whitaker that did not appear in an acquisition report. "I don't want a story," she said. "Not from you, not from communications, not from whatever the media decides to do with the Tim Hortons receipt." "No story," he said. "And if this becomes a photo opportunity or a brand moment, or the opening paragraph of a corporate values refresh, I am withdrawing the dinner and invoicing you for $4.30 plus interest. Current prime rate? Don't push it." He almost smiled. Not the polished version. The real one, which was slightly uneven and arrived too quickly to be performed. "Dinner," she said. "Once, no agenda, once," he agreed. "And you're ordering your own coffee from now on." "I've been practicing." The barista told Sasha it's still a work in progress. "The sizes are genuinely not intuitive, Cole." She picked up her mug. "It says the size on the cup." She walked past him out of the kitchen. He heard her laugh once to herself in the hallway. The dinner happened on a Wednesday evening in December, at a small place on Queen Street that Nadia had chosen because it had good food and no ambient lighting dramatic enough to be confused with symbolism. She had told her sister she was going. Beatrice had asked 3 questions, all of which were intelligent, and exactly the ones Nadia did not yet know the answer to. They sat across from each other with actual menus, which Cole handled with somewhat more confidence than the Tim Hortons menu, bored though he did ask one question about the specials that Nadia thought was technically unnecessary. She told him about the first Hartfield project she had led 4 years ago, which had come in under budget and on time, and had been presented by her then manager without her name on it. She told him she had not said anything at the time because she had been 3 months in, and had not yet understood whether that was normal or exceptional. By the time she understood, she had a documentation folder and her sister was in 2nd year. He told her about the acquisition. He told her about the complaints folder Sasha had sent him, and the night he had spent reading all 41 submissions, and the decision he had made to go in himself rather than send a team, because a team would announce itself, and he wanted to understand what the place actually felt like on a Tuesday morning in November, before anyone had time to prepare. "The courier thing was a miscalculation," he said. "The courier thing was a disaster. In retrospect, yes. You went to 14. I did not know the building had an accounting firm. It's on the directory in the lobby." He paused. "I was focused. You were lost." "I was," he said. "I found it informative." She looked at him across the table. In this light, he looked less like a man running a company, and more like a man who had recently learned something that reorganized the furniture of his assumptions, and was still figuring out where everything went. "The project credit corrections," she said. "The official file record, filed last week. Your name on everything retroactively. Legal confirmed." She nodded. She had known this already. She had received the notification, but she had wanted to hear him say it at dinner, without a conference table between them, to see if it sounded different. It did slightly. It sounded like a fact instead of a transaction. "The HR protocols," she said. "The escalation timelines. Sasha's presenting them to the full board in January. They become policy February 1st, with the caregiver provisions, all 6 of them." She turned her glass slowly. "My sister's name isn't in there," she said. "No, but the circumstance is, because it's real and it happens regularly and it needed a name." He paused. "I read the complaints carefully. I know you mentioned her once. I wanted it to be useful." Nadia looked at the candle between them for a moment. It was a small one in a glass holder, the kind that didn't try to set a mood and therefore succeeded at it. "Okay," she said. They ordered. They ate. Cole discovered that the restaurant had a dessert menu with 4 options, all of which he felt required clarification, and Nadia explained 2 of them before deciding that a man who ran a company could manage the other 2 independently. He managed them fine. Walking out afterward on Queen Street in December, the wind was the specific kind that Toronto produced in winter. Honest, impersonal, indifferent to what you'd been doing before it found you. Nadia turned up her collar. "That was dinner," she said. "It was," Cole said. "You didn't turn it into anything." "I tried very hard not to. I noticed." She looked at him. The streetlight was ordinary. The wind was rude and consistent. "I'm not going to tell you it's easy. The coffee story is going to follow me for a while. The process work is real, but it's also mine to finish on my terms. And you're still technically my employer. The contract with Sasha runs through April." "April," she said. So, he said. She looked at the street. A streetcar went past, brightly lit, carrying people in the particular silence that Torontonians maintained in transit as a form of communal agreement. "There's a coffee place on Adelaide," she said. "It opens at 7. The sizes are written on a board in very large letters, which I think you'll find helpful." "I'm genuinely improving. The evidence is limited," she said. "But I'm willing to observe further." He looked at her, and the expression on his face was not CEO, not acquisition strategist, not the man who had walked into a Tim Hortons at 6:48 on a November Tuesday, with a dead battery and a serious misunderstanding of medium. It was simpler than any of those things. It was a man who had found, in the middle of a complicated week, a person whose mind he wanted to keep being near. 7 o'clock, he said. "Don't be late," she said. "The good tables go fast." She walked toward the streetcar stop. He watched her go, the way you watch someone who has earned the right to leave first. It was cold and ordinary, and the wind did not care about either of them. But the street was lit, and she was laughing at something under her breath, and for the first time in a long time, Cole Whitaker had no interest in announcing anything. He walked back to his hotel with his hands in his pockets, thinking about nothing important, which was something he had almost forgotten how to do.